Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to make apple cider vinegar two different ways. So you can make it from store-bought juice quite easily, or you can make it the apple scraps cider vinegar. It doesn't matter which way you choose, or if you're like me and you have a cider press, you take whole apples, you put them through the cider press and you end up with apple juice, or in the American parlance, apple cider, because it's a cloudy juice that you come out with. But either way, so what we're going to do, we're going to extract some juice out of these ones. This one here we'll just pour into a jar and get it going. But the first thing you have to do to make vinegar is you start it fermenting. Vinegar is a two-step process. The first step is fermentation. The second step is introducing the acetobacters and letting them turn it into vinegar. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to chop up these apples. Normally you would use apple scraps. I don't have any apple scraps. I've bought these apples just for this video. So I'm going to use the whole apple. There's no point wasting them. So let's do that. We're just going to very quickly chop these up. You do want to chop them up nice and small for what we have planned. So it's just really simple. And it's a rough chop. No need to be pretty about it. Don't worry about the cores and the seeds. And we're just going to chop them up just into little pieces like that. Now, why are we doing this? Because what we're going to do from here, after they're all chopped up, I'm going to vacuum seal them into a bag, and we're going to put them into the freezer for about 24 hours. The reason we're freezing them is freezing helps break down the cell walls of fruit. So by doing that, we're going to be able to extract the absolute most amount of juice that are in these apple pieces. We're cutting them up quite small because that gives us more surface area, which means there's more access to the juice, shall we say. So all we're trying to do is just make it so that we can get the maximum amount of juice with the least amount of effort required. So I'm just going to chop up all of these apples and then I'll vacuum seal them and we'll put them in the freezer. So these have now been bagged up. They'll go in the freezer for about 24 hours. I'll take them out tomorrow afternoon, let them defrost overnight, and the next morning we'll put this on to brew. At the same time, we'll put this one on. So we're going to make a 1 litre, which 1 litre is just a fraction over a quart of vinegar from each different one. This one might end up a bit bigger simply because we've got quite a quantity of apple there. But yep, so that's what's going to happen. These are going in the freezer. This is just going to sit aside, and we'll start again in a day or so. Just before we go though, I'm going to read you out the ingredients of this apple juice. Apple juice from concentrate and ascorbic acid, vitamin C. That's it. The vitamin C or ascorbic acid is there to keep the colour. That's it. That's all it's there for. So there are no preservatives in this, which is what we need. If you use an apple juice that has preservatives in it, you have to neutralize those preservatives first. Otherwise, the yeast won't be able to grow. They won't be able to eat the sugars. They won't be able to convert that to alcohol, which means then your acetobacters can't convert the alcohol into vinegar. So when you go to buy apple juice, if you're going to buy apple juice, you want an ingredient list that really only says apple juice or apple juice from concentrate, either is fine, and ascorbic acid or vitamin C. Now, it doesn't even need to have that. If you have contacts with an orchard and you're able to get straight cloudy apple juice fresh from the orchard, brilliant. Snaffle up as much as you can. Put it into bags or containers and pop it in your freezer. Keep it for a year or more. So having access to fresh juices is amazing. So make use of it while you can. So yeah, this is just apple juice and vitamin C and straight apples. And from this, we're going to have apple cider vinegar. Here we are the next day. This is our bag of frozen apple pieces. I've just pulled it out of the freezer. The good thing about vacuum sealing and freezing straight away, although I didn't do a very good job with the vacuum sealer, but the good part about doing this is the apple has actually kept its colour. It will probably oxidise and go brown anyway once we do the next step, but for now, these are going to be left to defrost for the day, and we will turn them into an apple juice very soon. Our apple pieces have now defrosted. They're quite squishy and mudgy, and if you hold the bag up, you can see how much juice is already starting to come out of them. This is why we froze them in the first place, to help break down the cells and get some more juice out of it. So we're going to deal with these now. Very first thing we do from here on in, anything that is going to touch our brew, we need to sanitize. So I've got here a bottle that I've just made up of Star San. I've made it up according to the manufacturer's instructions. And I'm just going to spray this on, quite simply, all the surfaces that are going to touch it. Just let that sit for a minute or so. I'm going to need a small jug as well, so we'll sanitize that. And we're going to be using a potato masher. That gets sanitized too. Normally I would have a big bucket that I put everything into, but we're just doing this small batch for now. Excuse me. I've also just boiled the jug because we're going to need some boiling water. So let's carry on. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of the apples into a large jug. We're then going to get our kettle. What we're going to do is give it a quick mash. This also breaks down cell walls. We get more juice out of it. We're starting to pick up on the theme of getting juice out of our apples. So we want to get a litre of boiling water, or a quart if you're working in US measurements. And we pour this over the top as well. Once again, the boiling water helps break down the cell walls so we can get more juice out of it. Give it a good mash. Now, because we've added a litre of water, that's going to dilute a lot of the juice that we've got out of these apples. Diluting it reduces the sugar content, but we need a certain amount of sugars to be able to get enough alcohol percentage. So the relationship works that you give the brew yeast and sugar. The yeast eats the sugar, and in turn they effectively pee out alcohol. When you add acetic acid bacteria, or acetobacters, the vinegar mother, the acetic acid bacteria, AABs, they eat the alcohol and convert it into vinegar. So you need alcohol to make vinegar, and to make alcohol you need sugar. The apples as they are, probably eventually they will have enough sugar, but we've added water and we want to get a good quality product. If we were just to not add any more sugar, this would become quite a weak batch of vinegar. So we don't want that. We want this to be able to go to 5% acidity. So we need to add some sugar. So I have a set of scales here. What I want to do is I want to add about 150 grams of sugar. That will give me 45 points of gravity, plus what we get out of the apples themselves, which will give us, we'll end up probably with about a 7 or 8% alcohol by the time we're done. So 150 grams of sugar is about 3/4 of a cup. While the water is hot, we're going to just pour it in. And we're going to get mashing again because we want to dissolve that sugar. Righto. So what we do now is we are going to let this cool, and then we're going to add some yeast to it. So we don't want, if we were to add yeast to it now, the water that's in there is too hot and it will kill the yeast. We want the temperature of the fluid to be about 40 degrees Celsius, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will kickstart the colony quite well. So we'll let this cool, then we'll pour it into a jar that we can ferment in, add the yeast, and let it go. Now that we've started our apple scraps or apple pieces vinegar going, we're going to deal with the apple juice now. We don't need to sterilize. What we're going to do with this one is we're going to actually brew it in this container because it's sterile. It hasn't been opened. It's pasteurized. It's treated once when they bottle it. And so we are going to brew it in the container. But we need a bit of headroom. So we're going to take some of that out because as it ferments, as it brews and ferments, it will foam up. So what we're going to do, we may end up putting some of the apple juice back in. So we're just going to quickly sanitize a glass. That is drinkable afterwards if you want to. So we open this up and we're going to pour some out. What I've noticed in watching quite a few homebrew YouTube channels, and stuff like that where they're using store-bought juice. In America, your apple juice tends to have a slightly higher sugar content than in New Zealand. So we're going to add a bit of sugar to this. If you're in the States, you probably don't need to add too much more or too much at all. But for this one here, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. And that's, again, like what we did with the apple pieces vinegar. It's just to get the alcohol content up so that we can get the bacteria. Now for this, you don't want to sanitize your funnel. You want a dry funnel, otherwise the sugar sticks to it. And you also want to keep it dry because you've got there's a lump in there. You need to put your yeast in. Okay, I've got a couple of little lumps, we'll ditch those. There we go. Now we're going to put the lid back on and we're going to shake the bejesus out of it, as friends of mine say. We're just trying to dissolve the sugar as best as we can. The yeast will eventually break the sugar down and it will dissolve on sitting, but we want to give them a head start if we can. And we also want to oxygenate it. Look at that, nicely oxygenated. There is still a bit of sugar loitering around in there, but we've got the worst of it. Now I reckon we can pour some of this apple in. Now this is going to be fun. Watch this, see if I make a mess. I'm good at doing that. Yep, I make a mess. That's why we sanitize the glass, so that we can put it back in. Now if we just gently swirl it, see if we can break down some of that foam. That's as much as I'm putting in. And we'll just quietly get a cloth and clean that up. Now when it comes to yeast, we want about a 7% alcohol. So this is where choosing your yeast is really important. If you go with some of the cider yeast, so Fermentus makes a green packet, Saph cider they call it, that's only a 5% yeast. We want 7% alcohol. So you need a yeast that is capable of doing more than 7%. So Saph Ale SO4, this is an ale yeast. Now it doesn't make it taste like ale, so don't worry about that. But this is a 9% yeast. This one here is one that we get in New Zealand. It's a very bog standard type yeast. I've never heard of it elsewhere. It's called cider yeast, but it is Modi Lager 497. The research I've done on this says this is also a 9% yeast. And then I have a half-used packet of bread yeast. I've got a half-used packet. I'm not going to waste it, so we're going to use this. Bread yeast can go as high as 12%, but basically once the yeast is eaten through all of the sugar that's in here, both the natural sugar in the apple juice and the added sugar that you've put in, the yeast will effectively go dormant. You can pasteurize if you want to kill the yeast before you add the mother, but there's kind of no point because as soon as you leave it open to oxygen to start getting the vinegar process, yeast comes back in, but there's no sugar for them to chew on, so we're good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use this partial packet of bread yeast. I'll keep these for other brews. So we are going to add, because I'm going to add the yeast that's in here. I'm going to use our dry funnel. And I'm just going to eyeball it. Yeah. Because we're doing such a small amount, we don't need a terribly large amount of yeast. Put the lid back on. Shake it, get it incorporated. Now, we need to discuss these things. This is an airlock. This is a bung. This goes in there. I might have to use a small one. Luckily I bought one. If you absolutely do not have an airlock and bung, at a push, and I'm talking at an absolute push, you can leave the cap on, tighten it all the way up, and then undo it half a turn, and that stops bugs coming up and getting in. It also stops the chance of adding too much more air to it once it starts to ferment. But I have airlocks and I have bungs, so we're going to use them. So first things first is we're going to sanitize them. First of all, I've got to figure out which one's size are going to fit. Ooh, I think it's going to be that one, but I don't know how well it's going to hold down. I might have to do the cap trick myself. Right, there we go. Jam that in. It's not going to come out by itself in a hurry. Alright, and now we fill the airlock up with fluid. Don't use plain water because bugs can swim through it. So I'm going to add sanitizer water to mine. You can use, hello puss, you can use alcohol if you say you've got some whiskey or bourbon you really don't like, you can use that. So try and get that bung as far down as you can. Right, so this now, as this starts to ferment, one of the byproducts of yeast eating sugar, it pees out alcohol of course, but it also farts out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, but as it rises, it pushes the oxygen up. The oxygen then comes back through these two chambers and gets pushed out. So when you start seeing airlock activity or the blub 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 bubbling going on, that's when you know there is no more oxygen in here and it's all just CO2 pushing out. It's only taken about 15 minutes and this has cooled right down. It's now about 36, 37 degrees. So we're going to transfer it into this gallon jar. I'm going to use a preserving funnel, which as you can see I've already sanitized the jar as well. So we're just going to transfer this over by very carefully pouring this. This is going to go possibly horribly wrong. We'll see how much mess I make. But by using the preserving funnel it means we can get the apples in there without an issue. Oops. One piece sacrificed to the flawed gods. Alright, that's everything in. I'm going to put in a measured amount. Well, I'm going to eyeball measure it. And give it a good, luckily it's not too full, so I can give it a good shake, get that yeast circulating in there. Now we have to put something on the top that's going to allow the gases to escape but not allow bugs or oxygen to come in. These here are fermentation lids that they sell for mason jars. This jar here has the same size neck as a standard mouth mason jar, but they make these for wide mouth mason jars. So I've had to cut this down. It has been sanitized. I'll just give it another quick spray. But I'm going to use one of these today. Normally I don't, but because you need to know that you can use what you've got, we're going to use one of these fermentation lids. So yeah, I got a ring and just traced around the outside, cut it out, and that now fits this. And that will seal that up quite nicely. Let's crank it quite tight. Now as that starts fermenting, the other byproduct of yeast is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, but it will rise up through here and it will push oxygen out, and this little thing here will take on a domed top. Once that's on that convex look, you know that there's actually no more oxygen left in here. It's all CO2, so that's a good thing. Right, so both of these brews have now been started. We've got, this would be an apple scraps or apple pieces vinegar with added water and 150 grams of sugar, or 3/4 cup of sugar, and about 1/2 teaspoon of bread yeast. This is a commercial store-bought juice. We've added 2 tablespoons of sugar and again about 1/2 teaspoon of bread yeast. So we're going to put them to one side, let them get started, let that yeast start building up its colony, and once we start getting some activity in the airlock we will come back. But yep, this is both brews now started. Now just before these brews really kick off with the yeast and start active fermentation, I'm going to do my record keeping, just so I can always keep a track of how a brew progresses, how to replicate it if I want to. And for me, that includes taking readings with a hydrometer. So this is a hydrometer, this is a graduated cylinder, and then this is a baster. All of these have been sanitized before we've started. Now this is an entirely optional step. If you've followed the instructions I've given, you should get a good quality vinegar. But I always keep records, I always take readings, because I always want to know what my brew is actually doing. So this will give me an idea of how much sugar is in there. It'll give me an idea of my alcohol percentage, or what I can expect as an alcohol percentage. It will confirm what my alcohol percentage is after it's done, and it will also tell me when fermentation is completed. So I'm just going to quickly do it. So just draw up a couple of samples just until the hydrometer starts floating. We'll put just a little bit more in. Right, so that is sitting at 1.054 points of specific gravity. Now if I want to find out how much I can expect alcohol percentage wise, I just do a simple calculation on the calculator. If this ferment's fully dry, which I do expect, I'm going to get 7.08% alcohol. Now I wanted a 7% alcohol, so 7.08% is pretty good. Now because we did sanitize, we can pour this straight back in and that's fine. Try and get this back in, that's the hardest part. Now I'm not going to sanitize between these ones simply because they're both apple juice. Now this one's going to be fun because it's got all these pieces. I'm going to have to try and navigate around them and just get the liquid without any apple chunks. So while this isn't an essential step, it is quite a good habit to get into. Hydrometers don't cost that much to buy. They're easy to use. Yeah, they're just, I don't see why you wouldn't have one. Is that floating? Yep, that's floating. Now this one is going to have a lower gravity to start with, because all the juices and sugars haven't been extracted out of the apples yet. Right, so this is sitting bang on 1.050. So if it didn't extract, if it didn't extract at all any more sugars, we would still get a 6.5% alcohol, but I am quite confident in the fact that this will extract a bit more. So as I say, I'm quite confident we're going to get 7% out of this. Just put this mucky stuff away. Now what was the paperwork that I did? These are the forms that I use. Covers off what the ingredients are, the quantities, the date we've started it, what the starting gravity was, and then I can make notes. I can write down details when I've added the bits of vinegar, and I've also got areas down the bottom for calculating various things. So every time I do something to these brews, I will document it on these pieces of paper. So what we do now is we put them aside, let both of these brews sit. As I did say that I would come back to you and show you once there is airlock activity, and I will do that, but after that we're going to just let these sit for 10 days probably. It's not going to take long for them to ferment. They'll probably do it all in 7 days, but with this one here, because there is fruit exposed out of the water, every day we'll just give it a shake and keep the liquid over, keep the fruit cap wet so that there's less risk of anything going mouldy. Now the fruit is only going to be in there for 7, 10, maybe 14 days at the outside. So cool, we'll see you next when there's airlock activity. Well, it's about 12 hours later now and fermentation has kicked off. So here's our airlock activity. So that's all CO2 bubbles coming out now. The oxygen has been pushed out. The foam has decreased. Now that brown line, that's called a Croissant line. And I'll see if I can get zoomed in without getting blurry. See those bubbles rising up just below the bottom line of the foam? That's what you're really looking for to see fermentation activity is those tiny little bubbles. If you don't have a very good seal with your lid, you won't see the airlock activity, but as long as you see those tiny little bubbles going up, you know you've got fermentation. Over on this one here, that is now convex rather than concave. And again, down, the apples have jumped up out of the majority of the moisture. They've swelled up. Let's see if I can find some of those bubbles I was seeing earlier. Okay, I'm not really seeing. When I came out here before, I saw the bubbles. But either way, what we're going to do is give this one a swirl. This just keeps the fruit cap wet. As you can see, the moisture's come up, a lot of bubbling going on, and that just helps stop it from getting mouldy. This is probably going to ferment out quite quickly because it's quite a low sugar content. So I'd say in probably a week it'll be done. Hey folks, today we are going to check in on the apple cider vinegar that we started 2 weeks ago. First things first is we're going to take a gravity reading from each one of these, figure out if it is finished fermenting. If it's finished fermenting, then we will put it into another jar, inoculate it with a vinegar mother, and let it convert to vinegar. So first things first is let's take a reading. So we just draw up our fluid. This stuff has all been sanitized as always. Right, this one had a starting gravity of 1.054 and it currently, let's just get some of these bubbles out. And it's sitting at 1.000, so that is completely dry. So what we'll quickly do is we'll do some maths. So end gravity was 1.000. So to find out our alcohol percentage, we go 1.054, that was our starting gravity, minus 1.000, that's our end gravity. And we times that by 131.25. That's just the general coefficient of choice, shall we say. So that has given us an alcohol percentage of 0.78. Perfect. That is exactly what we wanted it to do. So we just pour this one back into here just for now so that we can test the other one. Now this is going to be fun trying to get the liquid out. All the bits are going to jam up in there. This is going to take a while. There's going to be floaty bits in this. Right, what's this one here? Oh, this one's gone a little bit beyond dry. This one is reading 0.999 2, 4. So this one had a starting gravity of 1.050. It's now got an end gravity of 0.994. 1.050 minus 0.994 equals times 131.25. This one's got an alcohol percentage of 7.35%. All right. That's also perfect. So we'll just pour this back in again. Right. What we're going to do, I'll start with this one because it's going to be the easiest initially. Now this has been sanitized. I'm going to pour this in because what we need to do is we need to figure out exactly how much we have, and then we have to add in a vinegar mother. I'm just going to use Bragg's today because if this is your first time making vinegar, you are going to have to buy a mother to start with. So you may as well just buy something that's reasonably common. So we've got to measure this first, so we'll just pour this in. Luckily the sediment, most of the sediment's staying quite nicely behind. Alright, so how much do we have there? 860 mils. So what we do is we go 860 divided by 4. That gives us 215. So we need to add 215 mils. Rather than trying to work it out in the jug, I'm going to use the scales, just add 215 grams. Right, so why have we done it this way? The way that you do it is we do a 4-to-1 ratio. So we've got 4 parts of juice. We've worked out how much 1 part of juice is. So it's 215 mils. And then we've added that 1 part of vinegar. So 4 to 1. So 4 parts of fermented juice, 1 part of vinegar. So our inoculation method was a vinegar. Final volume now is pretty much bang on, almost 1100 mils. I have added vinegar 215 mils, and so again I'm just updating the paperwork. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pour this from there into here and allow it to convert to vinegar. This is just a ½ gallon jar, and then this here is a paint strainer sock. It's very much like a pair of nylon pantyhose. I just put that over the top. That keeps any bugs out, but allows the Acetobacters in. What we need to do with this one now is get it all out of this container, strain it into this jug, calculate our volume, and figure out how much we need to add. This could get messy. Everything I do seems to get messy. So I've got one of those paint strainer sock thingies over the sieve just to help really strain any solid particles out. Now this may take some time to get all of this apple out. Okay, that took a wee while. So we have exactly 1400 mils of fermented juice here. Remembering we put in 1 litre of boiling water. So we managed to extract 400 mils of juice out of that apple. So we need to go 1400 divided by 4 equals 350. So we need to add 350 mils to this. And that's 357 mils. I'm just using up the last of the bottle. So I've added 360 mils. So I've added an extra 10 mils or 2 teaspoons of vinegar to this than I normally would, simply because I wanted to use up the jar. So that's now our thing done. So we go vinegar. We added 360 mils. So we now have a final volume of 1775 mils approximately. Just as always doing my paperwork. So I have tested it using a hydrometer. I tested it at 0.994. I have strained off the fruit, inoculated with 360 mils of vinegar mother. Excuse my terrible handwriting. There we go there. So now we will pour this into its jar. This jar doesn't hold as much as the other ones. Stand by while I go get a bigger half-gallon jar. That's not quite right. Let's try that again. Obviously not all half-gallon jars are made equal. So this is a ball mason jar, so it's obviously a slightly bigger half-gallon jar than the other half-gallon jar I've got. Right, so same as the other one, we'll put its little sock over the top and we will put it in the vinegar area. When I say it's going to sit near my fireplace, this is what I mean. So it's spring at the moment, we don't really use our fire. So I just leave it sitting up on the bench there. This big one here is a tub of green gauge wine that I've got going on at the moment. That's an apple cider vinegar. This little one at the back here is a red wine vinegar. This one is a tropical vinegar. It's starting to clear up quite nicely, but if you take that off, it's starting to get quite a nice thick pellicle on it too, so that's fabulous. So here they are. Even though they're really cloudy at the moment, that will settle out. Over time, if you look at the back there, that sediment will drop down. Here's the other apple cider vinegar at the moment. This one here is still in the fermentation stage, which is why it's got the airlock on it, but that's a 11 litre brew. But yeah, the sediment, the floaties that are in it will settle out and you'll end up with quite a clear vinegar and all that sediment at the bottom. I use that for the mother for my next round. and then the clear liquid on the top becomes the vinegar that I bottle. So we're going to let these sit here for about a month before checking on them. I don't even bother checking prior to a month or 4 weeks. There's just no point. So when we come back, we're going to test it by doing an acid titration test and see how we're going. We'll also check the pH on it to see how it's progressing. Welcome back. It's been quite some time since we looked in on these two vinegars. So we've got our apple scraps vinegar and we have our store-bought juice vinegar. Now you might notice these jars are very different size from the ones we started with. I put these on a heat pad and we ended up having a lot of evaporation, a phenomenal amount of evaporation. But what we're going to do today is we're going to do a sniff test, taste test, test the pH level of these brews, and then we're also going to do an acid titration test to see the acidity percentage of these two brews. So let's get into it. First things first, so this one here is the apple scraps vinegar. Smells a little bit vinegary, but not terribly strong. Do a taste test. That's very, very weak. That's not very vinegary at all. Now what I will do is I'm going to draw off some fluid. And I'm going to put a pH meter in here. I calibrated this earlier today. And we're going to see what its pH is. Now this meter is very slow. While we're doing that. Now yes, I am going to use the same syringe and I am going to use the same spoon to test these because I've got a pretty good idea of what's happening here and I've got a plan for once these are done. So, oh, that definitely tastes stronger, much stronger. That's vinegar. Right, that pH on the apple scraps vinegar, I'm just going to write some notes down here, is 3.5. So I'm just going to rinse this. I've got a solution. And now we'll put it into this one. So what we're going to do now is do acid titration on these. Now I'm not going to walk you through how to do the whole thing. I do have 2 videos on that. I'll put the cards for them, click on the link up there, or I'll also put the link in the description box below. So the first video is how to get yourself set up and ready to do acid titration. And the second video is how to actually conduct the test at home. Right, so this one's looking much healthier. It's 3.0 so far. But what we're going to do is we're going to use 2 mils out of this 20 mils that I've drawn off, and that is going to be used for acid titration. So we'll put these aside. We'll let this finish. Right, that's 3.08. So I'm just going to call that 3.1. Round it up. Right, so now we will do the acid titration. Okay, so to do the acid titration, we need a couple of things. We need our vinegar, we need an indicator solution, which is phenolphthalein, we need a testing solution, which is sodium hydroxide, and we need water. I've already measured everything out, so it's just going to be really quick. I'm not going to show you, as I said, I'm not going to talk you through the whole how to do it because I've got a video on that. So we'll just put the vinegar into the jar. 3 drops of phenolphthalein. 2, 3. 20 mils of water. Now I'm using a magnetic stirrer. You don't need one. You can just do this by hand. But the reason I'm using the magnetic stirrer is that it's much faster, which helps with these videos. And also if you're doing quite a few at once that you're testing, it's just so easy using this. So then I grab my syringe of sodium hydroxide. Now from tasting this is quite a weak brew. So this is a 3 ml syringe. So the video that I did, you use a 10 ml syringe. What I've done is I've changed the concentration of my sodium hydroxide. So I only need 3 mils now. I won't go into all of it, but basically if you follow the video, that'll be correct. I'm just using a stronger concentration so I can use less of the sodium hydroxide. Now because I know that this is weak, I don't expect to use very much of this. So I'm just going to do it very carefully, 1 drop at a time. And we're wanting to see all of that liquid turn and stay that bright magenta pink. So you'll be seeing how it's flaring pink as the drop goes in. Oh, we're nearly there. Probably 1 drop will do it. There we go. All right. Now I get my trusty calculator out and I do a bit of maths. How much did we use? We used 1/2 ml. So this here, I knew it was weak. Now I know just how weak. This is only 1.5%. Now because life got in the way, which is why it's been so many months since I checked these, this may have gone to 5% and has now oxidized and is degrading and has gone back down. But I have a sneaky suspicion it's not. Given that the store-bought juice, when I tasted that, I nearly lost my voice. And we started these on the same day. I just think the apple scraps one hasn't really taken. But we'll find out because we'll test that one now. So I'm not going to go through the hoopla of showing you what's what. I've got everything ready to go, so I will just put it all in and get it going. Now I'm doing this relatively quick compared to the other one because I know from the taste of this, this is definitely up there with acidity percentage. For the simple fact I nearly lost my voice when I drank it. So once I get up around, here we go, we'll start slowing down now. 1 drop at a time. Oh, nearly there. 1 drop. That's what we wanted. Okay, what do we have left? So, excuse me, the light is not bad, not great. 1 mil, 1.1, 2. So I've got 0.8. My brain's died. Right, so we used 2.2 mil. So, wow, this one here is 6.6%. So again, that one there is up there. So this is what I mean by the apple scraps may have gone up to 5 and come down again, but given that the store-bought was made at the same time, I very much doubt it. Now what I'd like to do, I'd like to blend some stuff. The apple scraps at 1.5% is too low to really be of use for anything other than maybe washing your hair. The store-bought juice at 6.6% is quite high. And so but also I don't have much of it, so I want to dilute that down. I've also got a much stronger brew, a concentrated one, that is also very high, and I want to dilute that down. And here's where we blend two videos into one. This is my concentrated apple vinegar. This is my apple scraps vinegar, and this is my store-bought juice vinegar. These two are in one video, this is in another. Now this here is 7.5% acidity. That's really quite high. This is only 1.5%. This is 6.6%. I would like to dilute this down. I'd like to dilute this one down. I'm going to use this. If I use water, I'm going to lose a lot of that beautiful apple flavour. Now while this is only 1.5%, it was made using apple scraps. It's got a subtle apple taste, but it's not as bland as straight water. So what we're going to do is we're going to dilute these. So we're going to blend the three of these batches into one batch. But before we do that, we need to do some maths. This here is a calculation where we work out, so how many mils we've got of brew A, should we say, and what its percentage is, brew B and its percentage, brew C and its percentage. Divide that by the volume, and that will tell us what our overall percentage of acidity is going to be. So what we need to do is we need to measure how much we have of each. I'm going to put them all into this one jug because we're going to blend them anyway. But I'm going to zero it out as we go. So that way we know how much we have of each. So we'll start with the concentrate. All right, so this one here we're going with A. So volume is 1548 and its percentage is 7.5. So we zero it. Now I'm going to use the store-bought juice. There was not much in that one. That was 182 mils, and that's a 6.6%. Now this one here, I'm going to strain it. I do, because I want to get that pellicle out. Now I know that this seems overkill, such a big strainer, but right before we go any further, let's zero that back out. Right, let's strain this. So inside this strainer, I have got a filter paper that you use for filtering like your cooking oils and stuff like that. You can use a coffee filter, 6 of one, half a dozen the other. This may take some time. That was 700 mils of 1.5%. So to do this calculation, the first thing I'm going to do is add up all of the volumes. So 1548 plus 182 plus 700 equals 2,430. Right. Yep, something along those lines. So now we do our calculation. So what I've done, by adding up all the volumes first, I've basically got myself ready for this bottom line. So what I'm going to do now is just do the maths across, A, B and C, and that gives us that. So 1548 times 7.5 equals 11610. 182 times 6.6 equals 1201. And 700 times 1.5 equals 1050. So volume A times percentage A, so volume A times percentage A equals that, plus, so now we just go that, plus that, divided by that. So let's do this maths. 11610 plus 1201 plus 1050 equals, so we'll just give our final thing, 13861 divided by our 2430 from our volume. So divided by 2430 and that gives us a final acidity of 5.7. Now that's still a little bit high, I'd like it a bit lower. Funnily enough, here's one I prepared earlier. This here is a cider. So it's apple juice, and instead of adding sugar to bring up the gravity, I added honey and then I fermented it. So basically this is an apple mead, and it's then been converted to vinegar. So I have 10.5 litres. This, I tested this earlier, and it is 4.5%. So we're going to do that calculation on a fresh sheet, and we're going to mix that there with this big lot. So let's work out what it's going to be. Now that we know all of our figures, let's work it out. Now the cider, we have 10.5 litres, no, 10.25 litres. Yeah, 10.25, so that is 10250, and I know that this is 4.5%. So I have to work that one out. 10250 times 4.5 equals 46125. So again, let's add up our volume. Now I know the volume on that one was 2430. We'll just go plus the 10250 equals 12680. Right, so what have we done? So pretty much the same as what I did on this sheet, I've done here. So apple concentrate. So now I've added up our volumes. All I have to do now is go plus, 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 add them all up there. And then down here, put this figure divided by this figure equals our percentage. So let's just do that math. So 11610 plus 1050 plus 1201 plus 46125 equals 59986. So 59986 divided by our volume will give us our percentage. 59986 divided by 12680 equals 4.73%. As simple as that. Now I think that's a pretty good percentage. Normally I aim for 5%. So 4.73 is not bad. You could still do preserving with that. So let's do it. It's as simple as pour this in. And what we can do is we can do an acid titration if we wish. And I didn't quite think that through with regards to volume. I'm going to have to get a bigger container. Actually, I knew this was going to happen already, and I already got the bigger container, I just didn't have it in place. Right, so I'm going to transfer all of this into here. And I'm definitely doing this off camera because this is about to get messy. Right, so it's all been transferred. It's got quite the head of foam on it because I ended up using the tap on that big 10-litre bucket. And so it got very aerated. I'm going to let this sit for a day or two just to settle out. I did the acid titration test on it and it worked out to be 4.5% all up. So 4.73 is what the maths said, but that obviously is based very much on a loose measurement of the big quantity of cider vinegar. I just said it was 10.25 litres. It may have been plus or minus a little bit. It was probably a little bit more. And so the science, the math says 4.73, the science says 4.5. I'm going to go with the science and say that we have approximately just over 12.5 litres of 4.5% apple cider vinegar. So this concludes our videos. And once this is settled out a bit over the next day or two, I'm just going to bottle it probably on the weekend, and it's going to be ready for use. And at 4.5%, that is quite capable of being used for any use, including preserving. In New Zealand, most of our vinegar is 4 to 4.2%, and people use it for preserving perfectly fine. I know in the US, they say it must be a minimum of 5%, but hey, it works. No one really gets sick over here anyway, so, and we don't generally do the water bath canning like what the Americans do. So this is still acceptable for preserving, hair washing, drinking, whatever you want to do with your vinegar. So I hope these videos have increased your knowledge, and I hope you use these as an impetus to give making your own vinegar a go, because it's definitely worthwhile. Thanks for watching, folks, and look out for future videos.